So why do we have paper rejections? What are some of the reasons why papers are rejected from different journals? Of course, there are some major issues, some minor issues. In this video, we'll be talking about some of these major and minor reasons for the rejection of academic papers from journals. Hey, what's up? Faizan here from Research Beast. On this channel, I share different tips and tricks for researchers, different motivational talks, and I also talk to experts about the research methods or anything related to research. So if you're interested in content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. Today, I will continue with some common non-fatal mistakes. Now, what do we mean by this is these are some mistakes that are consistently made by different people. It doesn't matter where they are from, developing countries, developed countries, doesn't matter what is their language, but these mistakes are commonly seen. Now, when I say non-fatal, it means that you do not get rejection for it right away, but you can get a very bad impression. However, if you make multiple non-fatal mistakes, that can lead to rejection of the paper. So let's go and look into some of them. One is obviously formatting issues and problems. So more and more people are making these mistakes with regards to formatting. So remember that if you are submitting your paper, you are spending 1 year, 6 months to 8 months, or 1 year to write that paper. You can clearly spend one day to make sure that your paper do not have formatting issues. And what do I mean by this is sometimes we work in collaborations, and then sometimes we work with people who are from other countries, and the default language that is set on their computer is, let's say, British English. You're working in American English. When you put them together, there's obviously problems with formatting, with spellings, with other issues. Similarly, some people put bullet points, some people put numbered lists, and when you put the paper together, you forget to make sure that everything is consistently done. So formatting issues is a common problem that we see with the papers that are submitted. It's a non-fatal mistake, but it can create a very bad impression. The other one is sending it to the wrong editor and journal. It happens when your paper gets rejected from one journal and then you submit it directly to another journal with the cover letter or with the introduction of the paper in the email or within the submission system. You forget to remove the name of the older editor and put the name of the new editor. So that's another mistake that we see. Grammatical and spelling errors, like I explained already. This one is also interesting: too few, too many, or missing references. So we see that many people either put too many references. In fact, one of my own students, she sent me her paper recently to review, and I looked at the paper. The paper was around 14,000 words. But the paper, when I started reading it, there was not a lot of stuff in the paper. So I looked at the references, and there were 186 references on the paper. So that's too much. I mean, there's no way people can read that many papers to write one paper unless somebody really wants to read. So make sure that the paper does not have too many references or sometimes too few references. Last night I was reviewing one paper and then I had to literally say that the paper looked more like a viewpoint or like a newspaper article or a blog post where there's a lot of stuff, but that stuff is not referred to. So make sure that you have references wherever needed, but do not make the paper into your viewpoint or your blog post, or don't make the paper which is completely based on what other people say and you have nothing to say in it. With regards to references, sometimes people add references into the paper, but those references are missing into the reference list. So you have the citation, but you don't have the reference in the list. That is also a common mistake, but it's non-fatal, but it's not good to have something like this. And then we have another issue where authors sometimes reveal their identity in methodology section or somewhere where they give a hint of who they are, which is again a very bad thing to do because most of the review process these days is blind. So avoid doing that type of things. The other thing that we are having is tables and figures are missing.
So tables and figures, and that happens when people convert their thesis or their dissertation into a paper. Now remember, in a thesis or dissertation, you do not have a limit on paper, on tables and figures. So sometimes people have 10 tables, 15 tables, and then normally you refer to those tables like as shown as table 12 or look at table 15. But then when you convert it into thesis, sometimes people overlook and then they refer to a table, but the table is not in the paper. So that's again another issue that comes across. Abstract is missing in many papers. So what happens is when you're submitting your paper in the system you also have to paste the title of the paper, the abstract, and the keywords. But then when you are submitting the main document, make sure that the abstract is on the first page of the main document. Why is it important is because when you submit the abstract to the system, that can only be seen by the editors. That cannot be seen by the reviewers. So when the reviewers get your paper, sometimes the abstract is missing, which can again be a basic mistake, but try avoiding doing that. The last one is multiple writing styles, which refers to the first point. If you're working in a collaborative work where multiple people are working on the same paper, obviously everybody have got their own writing style. And when you put everything together, the readers can clearly see that this paper is written by two or three people. Sometimes it creates problems because it's difficult to understand the logic or the flow. So make sure that when you put everything together, one of the people who is good at the language, or maybe you can hire somebody, a professional copy editor or proofreader, to go through the paper one time, make sure that there are no mistakes and the writing style is consistent. Now, again, as I said, these mistakes are not going to get a rejection for you. However, if you have a paper that you have sent to the wrong editor with some grammar and grammatical and spelling errors and some missing references, yeah, then maybe you can get a rejection because it shows that you were not really very careful while writing the paper. So many of these non-fatal mistakes may lead to rejection. One or two of them may not, but it creates a bad impression.
Hey guys, if you think you are getting some value out of this video, please do not forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. I would also appreciate if you can share this video within your social networks or within your networks of people that may need this video. Going back to the video.
Okay, now let's look into some of the mistakes, some of the main major mistakes that may lead to uh, rejection, and look at what we have here. So number one, paper is not well positioned for the journal. This is very common because it's very interesting that these days many people are not aware of the journals or name of the journals or which journal should they submit to. What happens is, I mean, you may even have seen this on social media, Facebook here and there, on groups that are related to research, or even people who are researchers putting on Facebook or other social media, can you please suggest me some journal that publishes paper in accounting? I mean, I sometimes have a big difficulty understanding like how can people even ask others to tell them about the journals where they should publish. I mean, if you have a full paper, already written paper, it means you have gone through literature review, you have read the literature review, relevant literature. So you should be aware of the type of journals where the papers similar to your paper are published. So you should be aware of the journals and what type of papers do they publish. So for instance, in hospitality and tourism, there's a journal called Cornell Hospitality Quarterly. It's published by Cornell University. It's a major journal in hospitality. It's one of the top tier journals. However, it's not many people submit to that journal because the journal is well positioned for applied research or research that has to do for industry. So if my research is theoretical, that and it has very minimum industrial implications or practical implications, perhaps I will not be sending it to that journal because I know that journal is focusing on certain aspects of research. So make sure that when you are writing the paper is well positioned for the journal where you are submitting. And that is why a few days ago we also talked, and I will repeat it again. Before you even start writing, you should be aware of which journal are you going to target so that you can read papers from that journal beforehand. So while you're writing, you make sure that you're following the discussion that is in that journal, or you are following the writing style or the discussion style of the papers that are submitted in that particular journal. The other issue is where authors are not clear or certain about its contribution. So if you as author do not understand what is the contribution of your paper, certainly the reviewers or editors would also not know about this contribution of your paper. Now, sometimes I've seen that people who do not have English as their first language make a mistake of clearly communicating the contribution. I mean, there's obviously contribution in the paper, but they fail to communicate what is that contribution. So remember one thing, that if you have really a masterpiece sitting on your desktop and you're not able to tell people what is special about that, there's no point of it. So contribution is important, but what's more important is how do you communicate that contribution. So this leads to another main reason for rejection, and that is when the authors are not clear or certain about the contribution of their paper. The third one is where the authors fail to answer the so what question. This is so much important, and it blends into the previous point where sometimes you have contribution in the paper, but you fail to answer what does your study do to deal with that. A good example for this would be where many people, like when you talk to MS students or PhD students, they normally tell you that I'm doing this study because there's nothing like this in the literature, which is cool, which is very good to say that nothing like this has been done before. But you are not telling me your contribution. By saying this, you are just telling me what is the gap in literature. When you say that it has not been done before, that is a gap. That is not the so what question. Basically, what you need to do is you need to link your findings to that gap in order to explain the so what question. So that's very important, where when somebody asks you, what should the contribution of your study, you shouldn't say that nobody has done it before. You should say that my study is telling me this, which is very important because nobody has done it before. So you have to link your findings with the gap in order to answer the so what question. Here are some examples of reviews that I have done recently, and specifically big points about contribution. And if you look at these points, these are not only talking about theoretical contributions, but also contextual or practical contributions. For instance, the first point says that authors have relied heavily on statistics in the paper. However, unfortunately, there is nothing substantial provided in implications part. Similar to introduction, where there's a lack of justification and rationale, conclusion section is missing on the contributions of the study. So that's that. And then sometimes people are focusing much on practical implications, which I said is completely fine. However, you need more justification or arguments on why you are doing it. So point number two is I do not see any theoretical contribution in the study. This is a replication study with limited information on why this replication is needed. Authors stated that this study extended Pine and Gilmore's 4E's theory to the context of homestays, which makes it a contextual contribution based on a very limited focus on why is this context so important. So again, remember that until you communicate your contribution in a proper way, nobody would understand what you are saying. So this point number two, this is my research area, customer experience, and my PhD, my initial papers have all been done on 4E model and Pine and Gilmore and this and that. Now, what was interesting about this study is that this study was very good. I really liked this study because it was pointing some important things. However, the authors completely failed to say what is it that they are contributing, what is that main thing that they are doing by writing that paper. And until you do that, obviously you're going to get a rejection for it. So that's another reason why people get rejection, because they are unable to answer the so what question. The fourth point, which is very interesting, is what was promised is not delivered. And why this happens is because when we start writing research paper, and now this is a very good example. that what we are doing right now, this research session which Dr. Sajid Bashir has organized. This is very good because you have a lot of researchers from around the world who are attending this session. A lot of new ideas are discussed, and people are really pumped up, very motivated to do things. Then we have discussions, roundtable discussions with our peers, with our colleagues, with our research partners about the topic, about the introduction. And when people start writing, they're so much in love with it. So introduction is finished. When we come to literature review, what happens is that there's a lot of stuff uh, you have to read. You read a lot of things, and when you are reading it, it takes out a lot of motivation. So the motivation that starts with the introduction goes down maybe 50%, 60% when you are done with your literature review, because you have to read a lot of papers. And when you send it to your supervisor, or when you send it to the people that you're working with, they point out a lot of mistakes. You go back, fix it, blah, blah, blah. Methodology creates a lot of problems because there are not too many experts in methodology. So when you come to methodology, obviously the motivation level goes down. Then we go data collection. Data collection has its own challenges. Analysis, sometimes hypotheses are not supported, sometimes results are not significant. So by the time we are done with analysis and we get into conclusion, people are really feeling like, let's just get it done with. I really want to finish it, I want to publish it, and blah, blah. And what happens is we get into a problem like this. So the introduction starts really good, and by the time we reach conclusion, then people really want to finish things. I just finish it. So what happens is what you promise is not delivered in conclusion. And also when we are writing introduction, we have a main research purpose. And then sometimes people are interested in making it into multiple objectives. But when we come to conclusion, we avoid answering all those objectives or all the sub research questions. So that can be also another reason for rejection, because what you promise in the introduction is not delivered in the conclusion. So that's another reason. Um, Another reason is outdated literature review. Many of you might think, why is outdated literature review a reason for rejection? It is because when your literature review is outdated, when it's outdated by 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, what it shows is that you are missing on a lot of recent discussion with regards to your research problem or your research area. Um, and why is it important to bring it in that latest discussion into your literature is because then you are able to provide implications. Now, if you have done literature review that is 5 years old, 4 years old, and you are writing a paper saying that this is my contribution, it's highly possible that in the last 4 years, 5 years, somebody else have already done enough research on that topic. So outdated literature review, that's why it can be another it can be another reason for rejection of the paper. Again, I will say that another thing is inconsistency, where your sections do not connect well. Why this happens is because many people are not properly trained in the language. We are not linguistics researchers, we are researchers in business management or social sciences. So it's important to understand when we are writing, there should be connection in um, each section, especially when the sections are very distinct from each other, very different. When you are writing introduction, it's a completely different section as compared to literature review. Literature review is completely different as to methodology. So those are main sections of your paper, very different, but they should connect well. You should always refer back to your aim. You should, when you are writing the theoretical framework, or when you are writing your hypothesis development, make sure you are referring back to the context of your study or to the aim of your study. When you are writing methodology, like I said yesterday, that in methodology, it's not important only to say what you have done, but also to say why you have done it. So when you are writing that why in the methodology, make sure you refer back to your main aim of the study and link it to that aim. I have used this method because it is relevant to the aim of my study, something like that, which brings connection into different sections of the paper. So this is another reason. Now, replication of a previous study. Now, this is something that is very important to talk about. Replication brings a lot of polarizing views. You have people who think it's very good, and then you have people who think it's not good at all. Unfortunately, many of the people with these views are editors of the journals. And because of that, if you have a replication study, either you have a very good chance of publishing it or either you have no chance of publishing it, depending on which journal are you submitting it and what do the editor of that journal think about replication of a previous study. In my opinion, it's important that you hold these discussions with the editors when you meet them at conferences or even emailing them beforehand. Like I said, if you're writing a paper and you know that this is going to be a replication of a study, one way of looking at it is go to that journal which you are interested to publish and see if they've done any replication studies. If they have done, then it's a clear indication that the journal is interested in it. If you don't find that, or if you are very fresh to know what is a replication study or how to find if it's a replication study, then the best thing would be to email the editor and ask the editor that I'm interested to send my study for your journal, and I want to know if this is a good fit for your journal or not. So that can be one method. But what do we mean by replication? So replication is where, yesterday somebody was talking about a base paper culture, where students pick up one paper, take it as a base paper, and then just do the same thing in their thesis. Um, I think you can certainly, in my opinion, again, because I said it's a polarizing subject, so I am of a viewpoint that replication studies are extremely important, but there should be a specific reason for replication of study. So let me give you an example. 15 years ago, I have a very close friend. He is like an elder brother to me, Dr. Jihan. Some of you may know him. He is also editor of Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Technology. So he did a study around 15, I guess 12 to 15 years ago, and the study was travelers' uh, preferences of technology at hotel rooms. So 15 years ago, obviously there was technology in hotel rooms, but that technology was maybe a big TV set or a telephone or probably iron or I don't know, whatever technology was there in the room 15 years ago. So he did this study 15 years ago on what people prefer to have as technology in a hotel room. Now this was 15 years ago. I can certainly replicate that study, replicate the whole methodology and how that study was conducted to see what are the preferences today in a hotel room from the viewpoint of technology. Now, why I said it's important is because the technology has changed so much in the last 15 years. And obviously, because the technology has changed, people's preferences for technology have changed a lot. So you can certainly replicate a study to show what are the differences in the last 10 years, 15 years. But remember, then your discussion, your research implications should heavily focus on those differences over time to show how things have changed. This can also be done for theoretical studies. Many people compare SERV-QUAL, maybe you know SERV-QUAL, service quality scale, replicate that into new context to see how that SERV-QUAL can be applied into a new context, or what can be changed or what can be added to it. In fact, I have a paper on Pakistan International Airlines in which we used AirQual, and that was for airline service quality, in which they have looked into how SERV-QUAL can be changed into airline context. And it's again a replication study. So replication studies can be good as far as you have a strong justification on why you are doing it or what are the implications after the comparison or after replicating that study. Here's another review that I did. This is a comment that I put on one of the papers that was replication. So the comment clearly says that I do not see any theoretical contribution in the study. This is a replication study with limited information on why this replication is needed. Practical implications are discussed, yet those are things already being practiced by the industry. There is nothing new offered. Authors stated that this study extended Pine and Gilmore's theory to the context of homestays, which makes it a contextual contribution based on a very limited focus on why is this context so important. So this gives you a full picture that if you are doing replication, but you are not putting enough emphasis on why this replication is needed or why that context is so important in which you are replicating the study, then there's no point of doing it. Now, some people, yesterday we were discussing that some people pick up a study and then they say that I'm picking up this study, the study has never been done in Pakistan, so I'm doing this one and this is good enough. I think you can do that, but by doing that, you need to put a lot of emphasis on why is it important to conduct that study in Pakistan. Just saying that nobody has done it in Pakistan doesn't mean anything. I mean, there might be a possibility that people have done that study in India, and Pakistan and India has a big similarity in culture. So then what's the point of doing it? So make sure that if, let's say, you're picking up a study that's done somewhere in the world, and then you are doing it in Pakistan, which would be a replication study, you need to focus heavily on what is so special about the Pakistani context from consumer standpoint, from organizational standpoint, from employee standpoint, whatever is the main focus of your study. What is it so important in Pakistan that warrants that study that otherwise people would not know? So I will give you an example. I have a very good friend. She is editor of Journal of Product and Brand Management, and maybe some of you know that journal. Recently, she shared something very interesting that came from Pakistan. And this is what I'm saying, what is important about the replication of the study and the context of the study. So somebody did a global research on the brand polarization in different countries. And you would be very surprised to know that if I can actually try to find it out and share that paper with all of you, that around the world, like every other country, any European country, America, Canada, whatever, any country, they picked up brands to show their polarization. Like I see that in America, somebody picked up Adidas and Nike. Somebody in Canada picked up, let's say, Nikon and Canon. Or somebody picked up Pepsi and Coca-Cola, which is brand polarization to extreme, right? People like one, they don't like another one. The only country that has picked up a political figure as a brand was Pakistan, where somebody picked up Imran Khan and Nawaz Sharif. And this is a published research. So again, if somebody has to do work on branding, and then they have to study why in Pakistan, let's say if somebody is working on branding, and they say that nobody has done this in Pakistan, perhaps this is a good example saying that, okay, Pakistan is the only country where politicians are branded, they are considered as brands. And again, this is just an example to say that if you are working on anything that has already been done before, but you are doing it in, let's say, Pakistani context or any other context for that reason, justification is extremely important, why that context is so important. Plagiarism, again, a big mistake. Uh, this will not only lead to rejection of your paper, but this will lead to you being blacklisted from that journal or maybe other journals, because most of the editors know each other. So don't do that. Now, one important point here is that many people pick up their own work. So you publish a paper, you pick up your work from that paper and you add it to another paper, saying that it's not plagiarism because it's my own work. I think it's completely wrong. It's plagiarism and you shouldn't be doing it. Some people also pick up things from their thesis or their dissertation and put it in their paper, saying that, well, this is my own paper, this is my own work and it's never been published. It's in a thesis, so what can I do? Again, this is one topic that is very polarizing. People have different viewpoints. We have a few people who think that if you pick up something from your thesis and you can prove it that it was your thesis, then it's okay. But we also have another group of people who think that if you are picking up something from your thesis, you still have to rephrase it, because when you did it for your thesis, you passed your degree and you already got credit for your work. So now if you are using the same work for publishing in a journal, you are double dipping, or you are taking 2 credits for one thing. So you cannot do that. And that one is called self-plagiarism. So remember, as I said, it's a polarizing subject, but in this one, the second group is much bigger than the first group. So most of the people think that self-plagiarism is not accepted. Very few people think it's okay. So think about it. If you want to take a chance, you can do that, but I would avoid. I would recommend to not do that. Then we have another thing, and that is story writing. Yesterday, I shared something with you people about an abstract and the title of the papers and how can you make it interesting to bring in people. It's the same thing with the whole write-up, writing an interesting story. Very important. Like, yesterday somebody was saying that it's very boring to read research papers, and I said I agreed with, because papers are written in a boring way. So what's important is how do we tell an interesting story. So when you are writing an introduction, please make sure that in your introduction, you are referring to some examples, refer to some real world examples, refer to another paper, bring it more like a story. So people read it, they feel good. When you are writing your implications or conclusion or discussion part, and that one you can also refer to some very interesting examples or stuff like this. I have a paper that I did around 4 years ago. It's published in tourism management. It's on airports and the national culture portrayed in airports. That paper I'm really proud of, because I spent a lot of time writing that paper, especially the introduction and discussion, into an interesting story. I really loved it, and until now, it's one of the best papers I've ever written, because it was really like an interesting story. And let me tell you that after I wrote this story, this paper, this was picked up by a couple of media outlets and some newspapers, and they published some things about it. One of them, because it was about airports and airlines and how culture impacts people's delight and stuff like that, one of the magazines that picked up that research paper and wrote a small piece on it was a magazine that normally people put in the airline. So if you travel by air, sometimes you see that they put a magazine inside the airline, right, inside the plane. So one day I got a call from an 80-year-old lady in my office, and I didn't know her. I was very surprised to get the call, but that lady actually called me just to thank me. In the US, she told me that she is 80 years old, and every time she goes to airport, she has a lot of problems because the airports are not designed in a way that are friendly for older people. And I brought something like this in my paper, and she read that one in the magazine in the plane. And after that, she tried to find who wrote the paper, and she found me. She called me just to thank me. Again, I mean, these are things that really motivate you to do more research and really do good research, right? So telling an interesting story can go a long way. Not telling an interesting story can lead for rejection. So that's another major reason. Just for fun, do you guys know this? Anyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maslow hierarchy, right? Do you know it has changed, right? Yes? Like this? Have you seen this version?
Yes.
Right. So why I'm putting it here is it's just for fun. But if you think about it, our lives have changed like this. And this is an interesting story to say that for many people, when they wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is pick up their phone. How many of us, when the phone is like 5% battery left, we feel like a very strange feeling inside, like what's going to happen? What's going to happen? So, remember one thing, life has changed for many people, right? Things have changed, but you have to make it into an interesting story to tell to other people so that they can get into your research. Now, you can easily do that by making it very boring, or you can do it by really putting an interesting story together. So the second one is much better. Okay. All right. The other one is you have not responded to the reviewers' comments. Now, this is very important. I was saying that your mindset should be that, even you submit your paper, it's highly impossible that you get acceptance in the first go. So let's say if your paper doesn't get rejected in the first round and you get a revision, you should be very happy for that, because remember one thing, if your paper is not rejected in the first round, it means that the editor, especially the editor, thinks that your paper is good and it can be improved to be accepted. It doesn't mean that the editor is going to reject your paper, because if the editor was if the editor thought that your paper is not good enough, the editor would have rejected the paper. And it's very easy for the editors to do, right? I mean, why would they not do it? But the fact that they are sending a revision means that the editor thinks that you can fix your paper and you can make it publishable. So when you get the reviewers' comments, make sure that you work on them. One pro tip for all of you is that when you get the reviewers' comments, don't read them. Leave them for 1 or 2 days, because when you are reading the comments, as soon as you get them, you are actually first very excited, because after maybe 1 or 2 months or 3 months of constantly checking the status of your paper, now you got the reviewer comments, you are obviously very excited. A lot of excitement can lead to a lot of frustration. Now, if the reviewer comments are a little negative, because you are so excited, it can suddenly put you off. It can really demotivate you. So my suggestion, and this comes from a lot of experience, that when you get the reviewer comments, do not read it. Even if you read it quickly, but then leave it for a couple of days. After 2 days, 3 days, when you are normal, then pick it up, read it 1 time, read it 2 times. There's a problem with many of us, and the problem with many of us is when you are reading something that is critical of you. Okay, if you did something and I'm giving you some feedback on it, it means that I'm critical of you. When I'm critical of you, you automatically in your head are being defensive. So without listening to me, you are trying to defend yourself, which is a very bad thing to do when it comes to reviewer comments. So what happens is, when people are reading the comments, right when they are reading, they're not writing anything. At the time when they are reading, in their head, they are making the counter arguments for it. Like, how can I avoid doing this, or how can I do it? Whatever. Do not do that. When you are reading the comments, read it 1 time, read it another time, and then leave it for 3 or 4 days. After that, come back, put them into a table, and then deal with them one by one. But deal with them honestly, because again, it depends on you if you want to make that paper accepted or rejected. Now, let's say if reviewer put the comments and you didn't deal with them and you send it back to the journal, or if you, for every single comment, you say that, oh, I didn't want to do this, or it cannot be done, or blah, blah, blah. Oh, yes, I just remember a very good example. Recently, I reviewed a paper and I sent it to the authors back, saying that, the statistics that you have used are not good. I mean, you have done this, which is a very basic mistake. So I would really recommend you do this other test instead. Now, I was very nice to even tell the author that, what you did is not right. Instead of this, do this test. I even pointed it. Any person that has a little intelligence would understand what to do here. You just do it, Or if you are not sure that the reviewer comments are good, then you write a counter argument saying that I've read this paper, or this book or that book suggested it, that's why I didn't do this, whatever. But what I get for that comment was, the person said that I actually referred to a statistics professor in my university, and that professor in my university thought that my test is correct. This is the response I get from the author. So now you imagine that for something like this, what is the editor going to do? The editor does not know the professor in your university, but the editor knows me as the reviewer, and the editor knows that I've done enough reviews for the editor to know what I'm talking about. And then the editor also has their own mind. So when they forward the email to the authors, they know what I've written, and they know what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So make sure that when you are responding to reviewer comments, you are responding them in the right way in order to avoid rejection. I think that what you need to do is understand that your contribution can go on multiple levels. It can be theoretical or conceptual. If you're bringing a new concept, you're proposing a theory, extending a theory, if you are criticizing a theory, that's your theoretical contribution. You can also do a methodological contribution, which involves scale development, new methods of sampling, new methods of data collection, new methods of analysis. That can be a methodological contribution. Or you can do a contextual contribution, which means you conduct a study in a new context, you replicate a study. Again, remember that the focus should be on why is that context important. However, having said that, remember that when you are working on your paper, it's highly possible that somebody else is also working on that topic. So if you spend too much time on your work, it's possible that some other people have published their work on similar topic. So remember to craft and recraft your introduction a few times. The first time you write your introduction, it's possible that by the time you finish your paper, your introduction may need a revamp because you didn't know your findings at that time. You didn't know how your conclusions would be. So make sure that you recraft your introduction in the end. Remember, if you are playing safe, like if you have reference for everything, if you want to justify everything, people are going to question the novelty of your study, like what is new in this study. If you go novel, which means if you go completely new, people will question everything. And this happens with a lot of us. So remember that you should strive for multiple unique elements. Maybe you should make a conceptual or theoretical contribution in a new context. Then you have a much bigger chance of getting accepted. Maybe you are making a methodological contribution by replicating a study in a new context. So make sure that you are bringing multiple unique elements in your study so that the appeal for that study increases.